I was sent to guard an alien prisoner, but she spoke my name like she'd known me forever. Lieutenant Kale stood still in the hallway, the soft hum of the warship's engines vibrating beneath his boots. The corridors were quiet, too quiet. He glanced at the mission briefing on his datapad one last time, confirming what he already knew. His new assignment was unlike anything he had faced before. It wasn't just any prisoner transport, it was a high-risk operation. The prisoner he was assigned to guard was not just anyone. Her name was Lyra, and she was no ordinary alien. She was a member of the Cavalry, an ancient race known for their powerful psychic abilities, and she had escaped from a high-security facility. Now she was locked up on this ship under Kale's watch. Kale had always been a soldier of action, someone who followed orders without question. The mission was simple: guard the prisoner. No one told him why Lyra was so important, but that didn't matter. The higher-ups had their reasons, and he had his orders. He was used to missions like this, but something about this one felt different. The warship, the Artemis, was a colossal ship, designed for deep space combat and transport. It was sleek and imposing, its dark metal hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. The ship's crew was small, but efficient. They had been on a long journey through deep space, and it would be several weeks before they reached their destination. During this time, Kale's primary task was simple: ensure Lyra remained locked up and contained. It should have been straightforward. He had done it before. He made his way to the holding cells, a part of the ship few crew members ventured into. The prisoners were kept here, far from the rest of the crew, in isolation. It was a necessary measure, especially for someone like Lyra. She had been involved in a series of violent rebellions against human colonies, and her capture was considered a major victory. But Kale knew better than to trust the files. He had seen prisoners who were labeled as dangerous and violent, only to find they were simply people caught in circumstances beyond their control. He approached the reinforced door to Lyra's cell and placed his hand on the scanner. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the prisoner inside. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, her long, silver hair spilling around her like a curtain. Her eyes were closed and her posture was serene, almost meditative. The cell was sparse, just a bed, a small table, and a chair. It looked like she didn't mind the isolation. Kale stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. He had been briefed on her appearance: tall, slender, with sharp features that suggested strength. But seeing her in person was different. There was something in her presence that was almost otherworldly. Even though she was confined to this small cell, she radiated an air of calm power. "Lyra," Kale said, stepping forward. Her eyes opened and she looked directly at him. Her gaze was piercing, as though she could see through him, past the surface to something deeper. Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Kale," she replied, her voice soft but clear, as if she had known him her whole life. Kale froze. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the fact that she had spoken his name. It was how she had said it. There was a familiarity in her voice, an intimacy that made him feel as though they had shared a history together. But that was impossible. They had never met before. Or had they? His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of it. He shook his head, trying to clear the feeling from his mind. This was just part of her psychic abilities, he reasoned. Cavalry were known for their mind tricks. They could read thoughts, plant suggestions, even manipulate emotions. It was a well-known tactic to disarm their captors, to make them feel something for the prisoner, something that would cloud their judgment. "How do you know my name?" Kale asked, keeping his voice steady. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him with those deep, silver eyes. Kale could feel her gaze as if it were a weight pressing on his chest. He shifted uncomfortably, but he refused to look away. He had been trained for this. He wouldn't let her manipulate him. "You don't remember me, do you?" Lyra said, her voice laced with a faint sadness. Kale clenched his jaw. He hated the way her words seemed to settle in his mind, making him question everything he thought he knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, trying to regain control of the conversation. But Lyra simply smiled again, that same mysterious, knowing smile. "You will, Kale, you will." There was something unsettling in her tone, something that made his skin crawl. He had to keep his distance. He couldn't let her get to him. "Stay in your cell, Lyra," he said firmly, "and don't try anything funny." Lyra tilted her head, a playful glint appearing in her eyes. "I don't need to try, Kale. I've already won." Kale narrowed his eyes, but before he could respond, the door behind him slid open. A voice crackled over his earpiece. "Lieutenant Kale, we're approaching the next phase of our journey. All personnel are to report to their designated stations immediately." Kale's eyes flickered to the door, then back to Lyra. He didn't know what game she was playing, but he couldn't afford to be distracted. "I'll be back later," Kale said, his tone clipped. He turned and left the cell, his mind whirling with unanswered questions. As the door shut behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something had changed in the air, something he couldn't quite grasp. He tried to focus on his next task, but Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "You will, Kale. You will." Kale's footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as he made his way to the command deck. His mind was still reeling from his encounter with Lyra. That feeling, the strange familiarity of her voice, haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear her words. "You will, Kale, you will." The way she said it with that odd sense of certainty unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the mission. Lyra was just a prisoner. She was dangerous, and his job was to ensure she stayed locked up. That was all. But as he entered the command deck, his thoughts continued to wander. He had been guarding prisoners for years. Some of them had been criminals, others had been political prisoners, and a few had been mere pawns in the larger game of war. But none of them had affected him the way Lyra had. Commander Rhea, a no-nonsense officer with short, dark hair and sharp eyes, greeted him as he walked in. She glanced at the mission status on her console, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. "Lieutenant Kale," she said with a quick nod, "I need you to head back to the holding cells. We're getting some strange readings from Lyra's cell." Kale's brow furrowed. "Strange readings. Energy fluctuations, temperature spikes. We're not sure yet, but we need you to investigate." "Understood, Commander," Kale said, not bothering to ask any more questions. He turned and left the command deck without a second thought. His job wasn't to ask questions, it was to carry out orders. As he made his way back to the holding cells, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The warship had been traveling through deep space for weeks, and they hadn't encountered anything out of the ordinary. So why were the readings coming from Lyra's cell? He arrived at the door to her cell and stood still for a moment, trying to shake off the unease creeping up his spine. He had been told to expect nothing more than a quiet, routine watch, but that was before Lyra had spoken his name. Kale entered her cell, and as the door slid shut behind him, the air inside felt colder. Lyra was sitting in the exact same position as before, her eyes closed, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders. She didn't acknowledge his presence right away, which made Kale feel like an intruder in her space. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then finally, Lyra spoke. "I didn't expect you to come back so soon," she said softly, her voice still carrying that strange, familiar tone. Kale tried to keep his expression neutral. He didn't want to show that he was still thinking about their last conversation, but it was difficult. She had said his name like it was something they both shared, something intimate. "I'm here to check on the readings," Kale said, his voice a little sharper than he intended. He turned toward the monitoring system embedded in the wall of her cell. Lyra tilted her head slightly, her gaze following him. "You think the readings are caused by me?" Kale didn't respond right away. Instead, he examined the monitors, his hands working methodically. The readings were fluctuating wildly, far beyond anything he had seen before. The temperature inside the cell had dropped several degrees, and the energy levels were spiking erratically. It wasn't a normal glitch. "What's going on?" Kale muttered under his breath. He pressed a few buttons on the console to try and stabilize the readings, but nothing worked. Lyra was watching him, her expression unreadable. "I told you," she said quietly. "You don't understand yet." Kale turned to look at her, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't just talking about the ship's readings. She was talking about him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling him, something important. "Explain," he said, his voice more demanding than he intended. Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile. "You were always quick to take charge, Kale," she said. "But sometimes there are things that can't be controlled, even by you." Kale's patience was running thin. "What are you talking about? I don't have time for games, Lyra." Lyra stood up slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She stepped closer to the bars of her cell, her silver eyes locking onto his. For the first time, there was no playfulness in her gaze, only seriousness and something else. Something that made Kale's stomach tighten. "You think you're guarding me," Lyra said, her voice soft but firm, "but you're not, you're guarding yourself." Kale frowned, unsure of what she meant. He was the one in control here. He was the soldier. She was just a prisoner. "I don't understand what you're trying to say," Kale admitted, his frustration building. Lyra stepped closer to the bars, her face mere inches from the thick metal. "You will," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The universe has a funny way of making us remember things we've forgotten, people we've lost. But you'll remember, Kale. You will." The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, and Kale suddenly felt like the walls were closing in on him. He had spent years training to resist pressure, to stay calm in dangerous situations. But this was different. Lyra was different. For a brief moment, the air felt charged, as though something was about to happen. But then, just as quickly as the tension had built, it evaporated. Lyra took a step back and sat down again, her posture calm, as if nothing had occurred. Kale stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to react. He had been trained to read situations, to analyze threats and make decisions in the blink of an eye. But with Lyra, nothing was clear. Every time he thought he had a handle on things, she threw him off balance. He didn't know what she was trying to do. Was she playing some sort of game with him? Or was there something more at work here? Kale couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain. Something about Lyra was making him question everything he had believed in. His training, his mission, and even his own memories. And that scared him more than anything. Kale woke up in his quarters with a start. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of Lyra. After his last encounter with her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the strange readings from her cell or the way she had spoken to him. It was something deeper, something that went beyond his role as a soldier. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. It was just a prisoner, just a mission. That's all it was. He had to focus on his duties. But every time he thought of Lyra, her words echoed in his mind. "You're guarding yourself." What did that mean? How could he be guarding himself? She was the one in the cell, not him. With a sigh, Kale pushed himself out of bed and dressed in his uniform. He glanced at the clock on the wall. He had a shift to report to, and the ship was moving into a new sector of space. The mission wasn't going to wait for him to sort through his thoughts. As he made his way through the halls of the ship, the usual sounds of the warship surrounded him. The soft hum of the engines, the quiet chatter of crew members, the clanking of boots on metal floors. Everything was normal. But Kale couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. It had been days since he'd last seen Lyra, but the strange pull she had on him hadn't faded. When Kale reached the holding cells, he noticed something was different. The usual guards weren't at their posts. A soft buzzing sound filled the air and the lights in the hallway flickered. Something wasn't right. He quickly moved toward Lyra's cell, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, he noticed the door to her cell was slightly ajar. He hesitated, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but something inside him urged him to open it. He stepped inside, his hand resting on the door. The moment he entered, the door slammed shut behind him with a loud clang. Kale spun around, his pulse quickening. The lights in the cell flickered once more, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then there she was. Lyra stood in the center of the cell, her eyes locked on his. Her silver hair shimmered in the low light, her expression unreadable. "Kale," she said, her voice calm, but there was something in her tone that made his stomach tighten. "You've come back." Kale's throat went dry. He couldn't explain it, but there was a sense of urgency in her voice now. It was as if something important was about to happen. "What's going on?" Kale demanded, his hand hovering near his weapon. He didn't trust Lyra, not fully, and right now, he didn't trust anything about this situation. Lyra didn't answer right away. She simply stared at him, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite place. Then she stepped forward slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. "The pull, the connection, the things you can't explain." Kale's grip tightened around his weapon. He didn't like where this conversation was going. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice sharp. "Stay away from me, Lyra." But Lyra didn't back off. Instead, she reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his chest. Kale could feel the air around him grow colder, as if the very space between them had shifted. He felt a strange, tingling sensation, like static electricity in the air, but it wasn't just physical. It was as if something deep inside him was awakening. "You've always known me," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "But you've forgotten all of it. You've forgotten who you really are." Kale's breath caught in his throat. Her words made no sense, but there was something in them, something that dug at him like a memory just out of reach. His hand trembled slightly, and he quickly withdrew it from his weapon. He had to regain control of the situation. "Enough," he snapped, taking a step back. "I'm not playing your games, Lyra." She didn't flinch, didn't seem to care about his retreat. "You don't have to play, you just have to remember." Kale shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. His thoughts were clouded. Lyra's presence was like a weight on his chest, suffocating him, pulling at something deep inside him. It was like she had access to a part of him that he didn't even know existed. He couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and fragments of memories he couldn't fully grasp. "I don't know what you want from me," Kale said, his voice strained. "But I'm not falling for it." Lyra smiled, but it wasn't the playful smile he had seen before. This time it was sad, almost pitying. "You still don't get it, do you?" she asked softly. "You're not in control, not anymore." Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the humming noise from the ship grew louder. Kale's attention snapped to the walls of the cell. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and he could feel the air become thick, heavy, as if something was about to happen. "What's happening?" Kale demanded, his eyes darting around. "What did you do?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, her expression softening. When she opened them again, there was a different look in her gaze, one that seemed far older, wiser. "The universe has a way of revealing itself," she said quietly. "And you've reached the point where you can no longer hide from it, Kale." Before Kale could react, the cell shook violently. The walls rattled, the lights flickered and dimmed, and an eerie rumbling filled the air. Kale staggered, trying to maintain his balance as the ship seemed to be jolted by an unseen force. His heart raced in his chest. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. "What's happening?" he shouted, but Lyra didn't respond. She was standing still, her eyes closed as if she was in some sort of trance. The rumbling stopped as suddenly as it had started. The lights flickered back to full brightness and the ship seemed to settle, but something was different. The air felt charged, electric, as though the entire ship had just passed through some kind of invisible barrier. Kale stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He wasn't sure if it was the ship's systems malfunctioning or if Lyra had somehow caused it, but he couldn't deny that something had changed. Something was different now. Cale glanced at Lyra, who was still standing there, unmoving, her eyes open once more. She didn't look at him. Instead, she simply whispered, "The journey has begun." The words sent a chill down Cale's spine. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. The mission had just taken an unexpected turn. And whatever was coming next, he wasn't ready for it. Cale stood in the middle of the cell, his body tense, his mind racing. The air felt thick around him, heavy with an energy he couldn't explain. Lyra hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but her words echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. The journey has begun. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping out of his control. He had been sent to guard her, to keep her locked up, but the moment he set foot in that cell, he knew something wasn't right. Lyra was more than just a prisoner. She was a puzzle, and Cale was only now starting to understand that he was part of it. His eyes flicked to the door. The sound of distant alarms reached his ears, followed by the low hum of the ship's engines. Whatever had happened, the ship was no longer in the quiet, routine motion it had once been. Something had changed, and Cale had a sinking feeling it was all connected to Lyra. "Lyra," he said, his voice hoarse. "What's going on? What did you do?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved slowly, almost lazily, as if she had all the time in the world. She stepped closer to him, her eyes fixed on his, and for a moment, Cale felt the air grow even colder. His breath seemed to freeze in his lungs. "You still don't understand," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that made Cale's skin prickle. "The journey has already begun, Cale. You've been part of it since the beginning, since before you even knew me." Cale took a step back, his heart racing. "I don't know what you mean. I'm just a soldier. I was sent here to guard you." Lyra's lips curled into a smile, but there was no joy in it. "You're more than that. We're all more than what we think we are." Her words were like a riddle twisting in Cale's mind. He didn't understand what she was trying to say, but it was as if every word she spoke was digging into something deep inside him, stirring up feelings and memories he couldn't fully grasp. "You were never meant to be just a soldier," Lyra continued, her voice taking on a deeper, more serious tone. "You were meant to be part of something greater, something that spans across time and space, and now it's time for you to remember." Cale's pulse quickened, and he felt a sudden surge of panic. He didn't know what she meant, but a part of him was terrified by it. "I don't remember anything. I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to." "You think you don't remember," she replied gently. "But you do. Deep down, it's all there. You just have to let go of the lies you've been told." Cale shook his head, trying to block out the growing unease. He didn't want to believe her. He couldn't. Everything he knew, everything he had been trained for, told him to dismiss this as some kind of trick. She was playing with his mind, trying to make him doubt himself. But the longer he stood there, the more he couldn't deny the strange pull she had on him. He turned and walked away from her, pacing in a circle. "This is crazy," he muttered under his breath. "I was assigned to guard a prisoner, not to listen to riddles and mind games." Lyra remained silent for a moment, watching him with those piercing silver eyes. Then she spoke again. "I told you, you're not just guarding me, you're guarding yourself. All the answers you need are inside you, Cale. You just have to open your eyes." Cale stopped pacing and spun around to face her. His mind was spinning, torn between the soldier he had always been and the growing sense of something larger at play. His instincts told him to leave, to call for backup, to get away from this situation before it escalated any further. But something deeper, something primal, told him that he couldn't just walk away from this. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice low and strained. "But you're not going to mess with my mind. You're not going to make me believe in some fantasy about who I am." Lyra smiled again, but this time it was almost as if she pitied him. "It's not a fantasy, Cale. It's the truth. You just have to be brave enough to face it." Kale's hands clenched into fists. The tension in the room was unbearable, and he couldn't stand it any longer. "I don't need to face anything. I have my mission, and that's all I need." Her eyes softened slightly, and she took a step back. "That's what you think, but your mission is a lie. Your whole life is a lie. Everything you believe, everything you've been taught, it's all a story. A story made up to keep you from knowing the truth." Kale was shaking now, not from fear but from anger. He couldn't understand what Lyra was saying, but the more she spoke, the more her words gnawed at him, pulling him into a world of uncertainty. He had spent his life serving a cause, following orders, believing that he was doing the right thing. But what if it wasn't the truth? What if everything he had ever believed was a lie? "No," Kale said, his voice hard. "I'm not going to fall for your mind tricks. I'm not listening to you anymore." But as he said the words, something happened. The lights in the cell flickered again, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The ship groaned, as if it were being pulled in some strange direction. Kale's breath caught in his throat. He could feel it deep in his bones, the pull of something far beyond his control. It wasn't just the ship, wasn't just the strange energy in the air. It was Lyra. Her presence, her power, was affecting everything around him. "I told you," Lyra said, her voice quiet but powerful. "The journey has begun." Kale's heart was racing. He turned back toward the door, but as he reached for the handle, the entire room seemed to tremble. The walls around him began to warp and shift, the air thickening as if reality itself was being twisted. He stumbled backward, his mind spinning. "What's happening?" he shouted. "What is this?" Lyra was calm, unfazed by the chaos around them. "You're starting to remember, Kale. The journey is beginning because you're ready. You've always been ready." Kale's legs gave out and he dropped to his knees. The floor beneath him seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain. He tried to push himself up to stand, but the force holding him down was too strong. "It's time, Kale," Lyra said softly, almost like a whisper. "You can't run from who you are." Kale's mind was a blur. He felt a coldness seep into his bones, a feeling he couldn't escape. The truth, whatever it was right in front of him. He could feel it now deep in his soul, but it was terrifying. It was a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Everything around him was spinning, and for a moment he thought he might lose himself in the chaos. But just as quickly as the force had appeared, it faded. The room became still again, the air returning to its normal weight. The lights flickered one last time before stabilizing. Kale blinked, disoriented. He looked up at Lyra, who was still standing in the same spot, her expression calm. But there was a different energy about her now, something Kale couldn't quite put into words. He was no longer sure whether she was his enemy or his ally. All he knew was that the journey she spoke of had begun, and he had no choice but to follow it. Kale felt as if his world had shattered and reformed, but not in a way that made sense. The room was still, but the air felt different, as though something fundamental had changed. The ship had stopped trembling, but his heart was still racing. His mind was a blur of confusion, fear, and something deeper, an undeniable pull, a force that was drawing him closer to the truth, whether he was ready for it or not. He looked at Lyra, who stood there watching him, her silver eyes calm, almost expectant. She didn't seem affected by the chaos they had just experienced. If anything, she seemed more at peace than ever. "You're not in control, Kale," Lyra said softly. Her voice was almost gentle now, as if she were speaking to someone who was on the edge of a great realization. "But you can be. You've always had the choice. You just have to remember." Kale shook his head, still struggling to understand. He had thought he was in control, that he was the one who was supposed to be protecting her, keeping things in order. But now it felt like everything he thought he knew was slipping through his fingers. "I don't want to remember," he said, his voice hoarse. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. "I don't want to know whatever it is you're talking about. It doesn't make sense." "None of this makes sense." Lyra's eyes softened as she stepped closer. I know it's hard, but you've been living a lie, Kale, a lie you didn't even know existed. You think your mission was about guarding me, but it was never about that. It's about you." Kale took a step back, his body stiff with resistance. "Stop saying that. I don't need to hear it. I have a job to do. I'm here to keep you locked up, nothing more. You're not just here to lock me up. You're here to remember. You've been protecting yourself all this time. Your mind has kept you from the truth, from who you really are." Kale could feel the walls closing in around him again. Her words, each one, felt like they were digging into his soul, unearthing things he wasn't ready to face. His mind was fighting against it, but the truth, whatever it was, kept clawing at him, making him question everything he had believed. He turned away from her, his hands gripping the edges of the wall to steady himself. The coldness of the metal beneath his fingers felt real, something tangible to hold on to. He couldn't let her do this to him. He couldn't let her twist his mind. "I'm a soldier," Kale said, his voice steadying as he spoke. "That's who I am. That's all I need to be." "You're not just a soldier, Kale," Lyra said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "And you're not just a guard. You've been a part of something much bigger than you could ever imagine." Kale's breath caught in his chest, his heart pounding in his ears. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to stop this feeling, this gnawing uncertainty that was slowly taking over. He had always believed in the mission, in the orders he followed, in the cause he served. But now, the foundation of everything he knew was shaking. Lyra continued, her words drawing him in like a magnet. "We've been here before, Kale, in another life, another time, and now we're here again in this life, in this moment. You were always meant to find me. You were always meant to know the truth." "No," Kale whispered, shaking his head. He could feel his hands trembling, the tightness in his chest growing. "This isn't real. This is some kind of trick." "It's not a trick," Lyra said firmly. "It's the truth, and if you don't accept it, you will lose yourself. You will stay trapped in the lies you've been fed. But if you embrace it, if you open your eyes, you'll remember everything. All of it." Kale's mind was reeling. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, unable to see the bottom. Part of him wanted to fall, to give in to the pull of her words. But another part of him, his training, his duty, fought against it, telling him to hold on to what he knew, to resist the chaos. "You're lying," Kale muttered, more to himself than to her. "I don't know you. I don't remember anything." Lyra's face softened. "You will. It's all inside you, Kale. It always has been." Suddenly, the ship jolted again, throwing Kale off balance. The room shook, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls. Then everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Kale blinked, his mind spinning. He stumbled forward, his hands gripping the walls for support. The ship was vibrating with a strange energy, and he could feel it in the pit of his stomach. It was as if the entire ship had become part of something else, something larger than just metal and machinery. He could almost hear it, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to come from deep within the ship. Kale looked back at Lyra. She was standing there, her expression unreadable. He didn't know if she had caused the disturbance or if it was something else, but he couldn't ignore it. The ship was changing, and so was he. "What's happening?" Kale asked, his voice shaky. "Why is this happening?" Lyra took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "The universe is shifting, Kale. Things are falling into place. The truth is coming, whether you're ready for it or not." Kale's chest tightened. He didn't understand, couldn't understand, but he knew one thing: Lyra wasn't just some prisoner. She wasn't just a danger locked in a cell. She was part of something much larger, and so was he. He tried to shake the thoughts from his mind, but they clung to him like a shadow. He had been sent to guard her, to protect the galaxy from her. But now, he wasn't so sure if that was his mission at all. What if he was being used? What if his entire life, his purpose, was a lie? "What am I supposed to do?" Kale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you want from me." Lyra took another step closer, her voice calm. "I want you to remember, to accept the truth. And when you do, we can stop running from what's coming. Kale's thoughts were a whirlwind, his mind struggling to make sense of the chaos inside him. He felt like he was being pulled in two directions, each one fighting for control. His duty, his training, his sense of identity, all of it was crumbling. And in its place, something new, something terrifying was taking shape. The ship trembled once more, and this time it felt different. The vibrations seemed to resonate deep within Kale's bones, sending a chill down his spine. The air felt thick, and the hum of the ship grew louder. It was as if the entire vessel was alive, connected to something far greater than Kale could understand. Lyra's eyes never left his. "You're not just a soldier, Kale. You're part of something that has been waiting for you. And now it's time for you to remember who you really are." Kale felt the weight of her words settle deep within him, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to fight it. He had always believed in his mission, in his duty. But now that belief was faltering, and he didn't know if he could hold on much longer. As the ship continued to tremble around him, Kale realized one undeniable truth. Whatever was coming, he couldn't escape it. The journey Lyra had spoken of had already begun. And now he had no choice but to follow.